Hey guys, it's Immersat. Welcome to another unboxing and review video. Today we will be reviewing the OnePlus Nord N10. OnePlus is a phone company that makes quality enthusiast phones. The Nord lineup is the budget line of OnePlus phones. For its price point, I would say it's kinda okay for it. You're getting a 90Hz display, decent cameras, and performance. The reason why I got this phone is because my AT&E was getting pretty slow, and we were switching to T-Mobile. So when we went to T-Mobile to get our new carrier running, then my dad offered if I want to get a new phone and can't be too expensive. So I picked this one up. Anyways, what you get in the box is the phone itself, some documentation, warp charging power brick, which is pretty much Oppo Super Bulk, but rebranded to Warp Charge for OnePlus because, you know, it's part of BBK Electronics, which owns those companies. So, the phone itself. First impressions, on the front, you have a hole punch display, which is pretty good. The front display has an IPS LCD 90Hz display with a 1080 by 2400 resolution. For its price, I would say it's decent in my opinion, but when I'm upgrading from even a cheaper smartphone with a less good display, but if you up your budget about $100 more, you would be able to get a Super AMOLED display like you would see in the Samsung A series. If you're coming from something from an OLED display, you will feel the difference when it comes to colors and detail when viewing things with having a 90Hz for the display is pretty nice, which gives the entire phone experience very smooth. And I do have a 120Hz display on my laptop, and I don't see a massive difference when I'm getting 30 Hz less from my laptop. If you're coming from a 60Hz, however, you will see a big difference. The glass on the screen is Gorilla Glass 3, which means it can withstand scratches, and it's pretty strong as well. I did put a screen protector on mine just to have that extra protection because you will never know, and it's good to be able to be prepared for that. On the sides you would have your basic buttons and all that. You've got your volume buttons on the left, and you've got your SIM card slot with micro SD card slot. If you want to extend your storage, power on the right, and your typical bottom, which has the charger, speakers, and something you won't see in this day and age, a headphone jack. Speaking of speakers, this phone comes with stereo audio with the dual speakers from the bottom and the earpiece. Not gonna lie, they actually sound great, but I do have an equalizer installed to make my experience better for me. I tuned my equalizer to my liking, so it may not sound as great for some people, but most of the time people won't be installing equalizers anyway, so it's more of a gonna be stock for most people. Anyway, here's the sound test for the stock in my EQ. The speakers sound really good for the price. The sound is equally balanced, it is loud at max volume, and with the dual speakers, when watching videos in landscape, it feels like the audio is like going around me. And having an EQ on, I tinkered with it to make it sound better for me. Overall, these are some pretty quality speakers for this price, EQ or not. Now focusing on the back. The back is a plastic build. When it comes to plastic builds, I'm mostly not so much of a giver for it because of its quality and its durability. But I kinda have to respect this back design because of its reflection effect, which makes it more high quality. It kind of reminds me of some of the Oppo phones. However, the back is a massive fingerprint magnet. If you use this for a little while, you're gonna see a lot of fingerprints on the back. And if you're the type of person that likes to keep their phones clean and perfect, you might as well buy a case for this. It also features a fingerprint scanner on the back, which is a nice touch because it's pretty convenient. The phone also has facial recognition, but sometimes it won't register in very dark places. Having a fingerprint sensor is a great backup to these types of scenarios. The fingerprint sensor isn't that good because of the fact that I have to tap it multiple times sometimes, which could sometimes get inconvenient. Which is why I also have facial recognition as my backup. Now let's talk about cameras. This phone comes with a quad camera setup with a 64 megapixel main camera with 1.8 aperture, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera with 2.2 aperture, a 2 megapixel macro camera with a 2.4 aperture, and a 2 megapixel black and white camera with 2.4 aperture. The pictures taken from this phone were alright. When it comes to OnePlus budget phones and their cameras, it's not really perfect. When taking pictures, I tend to notice that the colors are a bit washed in some instances. If you compare these cameras to something like the Pixel 4a, you will notice this difference to the millions. Take this example I found. If you compare this phone's camera to something like the Pixel 4a, you will notice how washed the colors look compared to the Pixel. The Pixel is able to capture more saturated and equally balanced lighting, having more contrast and the shadows looking better, whereas the OnePlus colors are less saturated and it looks a bit whiter. But if you're coming from more lower quality camera phones, you won't be worrying so much about this. In my test, I was able to capture pretty decent photos. In most instances, you're getting a vibrant looking photos with good light balance, they aren't too contrasted, and being able to have that HDR feature makes the photos look good. The 64 megapixel sensor is able to capture more sharper and detailed images, but you will be losing out on the HDR capability. It still captures good images though, but it really depends on the lighting. Here's another shot testing out the color for the camera. You can see it captures a good amount of color with the HDR. In instances like these, you're getting a saturated experience. Maybe a little too much for some. Take this sensor rose. It seems a bit oversaturated and the details are just being left out there. Here I tested 3 cameras together. First, we will talk about the ultra-wide lens. It captures darker than the main camera. You will see this slight difference in just a few moments. Because this is a darker shot, you will see that the quality is slightly degraded. Outlines around the objects just seem a bit fuzzy, and it doesn't have so much detail, which is expected. Here's a shot in the normal lens. Like what I said previously, like normal lens can capture slightly better. However, there is also a lot of noise at the bottom of the picture. If you look closely, you can see the amount of noise there is in the sidewalk and the grass, which I may be nitpicking at this point, but the noise does show. Other than that, the details around objects look less fuzzy than they are on the ultra-wide, but in some areas you will see some fuzziness in some areas around some objects. And this is the quality of the telephoto camera. We can see that the objects just look more like silhouettes and doesn't capture much detail in the objects, which is pretty expected when taking these night shots and without using the nightscape feature, which I'll go over later on. Here are some test pictures with a lot more lighting. First is the ultra-wide. As you can see, colors just look a bit washed. For example, this math book looks more greener in real life, but the picture, it just has less pop to it. The overall shot shows that the dark colors are more brighter and contrasted. This is a shot with a normal lens. The overall shot shows that dark colors are more darker and the black areas on the sofa and the fireplace now have a darker black to it. These two pictures side by side just give an example of the inconsistency that can occur when you're taking pictures with this phone. Once you are using the ultra-wide, colors are a bit saturated, while on the normal, you are having a slightly less saturated experience. Slightly. Not too much. Slightly. On the bright side, the main camera captures more contrast and detail than the ultra-wide. having less blur but is expected from an ultra-wide camera. When moving to the telephoto, it still captures some detail even when zoomed all the way to 10x. This is a shot where everything is evenly lit. I would say that honestly, this seems alright. It's not the best, but at the same time it does a great job when you talk about contrast. It's not too low or high, it's just at the middle there. The saturation is about the same as the normal lens though. This is another test I had with the cameras with a bit more complex environment, and the details are just out the door. Zoom closely and you can just see that pixelation happening there, and overall it's not a great shot. I've also done some tests on the 64 megapixel sensor. This first shot, it was able to capture detail pretty well here. Shadows look good, it looks all sharp, and contrast is about perfect for here. Lighting is all well balanced throughout the shot. I also mentioned that the phone recommends this sensor for well-lit scenes, and the 16 megapixel camp sensor is recommended for a better dynamic range. I feel like this shot captures that the lighting is pretty important if it's going to capture a lot of detail. This next shot shows how well it can capture color. It did pretty well for this shot. The greens look realistic and not too oversaturated. It is saturated enough to not look bad. The shadows were captured well there. Lighting was all balanced throughout. When it comes to indoors, however, that's where we see some flaws. First, I feel like that the entire image just looks a bit washed out compared to the previous images. And also, some spots like this area, it just looks completely black, and it doesn't capture as much detail. But what I would like to mention is that it does pretty well with the lighting. Here's another outside shot. This is less demanding than some of the other shots, but I do have to mention how well it does with contrast. For example, zooming into the grass, it was able to capture details well with its contrast. However, keep going further and that detail fades away. But I would give it a point when it captures detail on the library and the trees. Finally, I would like to test out the camera in low light situations. Without nightscape, it doesn't capture as much. There is nothing that the camera can capture except the light and the silhouettes of the poplar trees. How it dealt with the lights, I feel like it's overexposed. It just seems way too bright. Nightscape does help being able to see, but not as much. I was able to see the sky a bit better in the trees. I'm also able to see a bit of the playground as well. Overall, Nightscape does help with the camera seeing a bit more in low light areas, but it won't help too much. Although it's better than just plain dark. And here is the test of the black and white camera. What it does is what it basically says it all. It takes pictures in black and white. So instead of using a filter, it uses a camera instead. It does take good black and white photos though, so there isn't really much to comment on that. Here are tests of the portrait mode feature. What portrait mode does is analyze the photo and make separate layers on the subject and the background, being able to make this blur effect. When I took pictures with this mode, it wasn't perfect. Sometimes you might get a good shot with this, but in most instances, you will notice that the outline around subjects will be blurred thinking that it's the background. Also, this processing has less blur than the other phones. Overall, I don't believe this is a great phone for taking perfect portrait pictures. Here is the test for the macro camera. The macro camera takes extreme close-ups at objects and has the ability to pick up even tiny little details on the specific spot you are taking a picture of. This camera has the least amount of quality, but you are able to go very close to objects and capture some detail on the spot. Like I said before, sometimes you get what you want, other times you won't. Now it's time for the video test. This is a test. I like that stabilization. This is 1080p 60. It also supports 4K, 30 FPS. Alright. This is the 4K test. The FPS is, this is 30. Not bad. And this is the zoom test. Up to 8 times zoom. Quality is for the max zoom. It's but like it's a zoom camera, so what do I mean expect? So anyways, not gonna lie, that's pretty cool though, pretty decent. Next, it's time to test out the performance of the phone. This phone comes equipped with the Snapdragon 690, which has 8 cores and 8 threads, with a clock speed of 1700 to 2000 MHz. It has 6 gigs of RAM equipped with it. In the surface, this seemed like fast specs. What I've got on the benchmarks were pretty decent. For the single core score, I got around 597, which is around the score of the Galaxy S9, with 570 points. And the multi-core score having 1665, which is around the score of the Galaxy A80 with 1652, and even beat out the Pixel 5 with a score of 1561. Because of the A77 cores, this chip is on par with mid-range chips like the Snapdragon 765. When using this phone on a daily basis, I am getting no lag issues and the overall use is very smooth and fast. Apps load really quickly when opening them, gestures are smooth, and the overall experience is respectable. When it comes to gaming, the experience is smooth as well. OnePlus has this feature called Gaming Mode, where it blocks notifications so that when you're playing, it doesn't obstruct your view. Instead, it would just show text instead of a full notification. Back to performance. With this 90Hz refresh rate, the overall experience is just buttery smooth. Casual and light games is a breeze for this phone. I am not getting any issues and they are pretty expected for these specs. When it comes to high graphic games, it also breezes through them easily. In intense scenarios like Call of Duty, the phone handles the graphics really well. They are set on a high graphics mode, and I'm not getting any lag issues or performance issues whatsoever, even if they are intense or not. I'm not testing out that much performance intensive games, but because of this experience, I feel like it can handle most of these intensive programs or games pretty well. Also, for those type of people, yeah, it can emulate games. Emulators like PPSSPP run well, but some like Dolphin will not run as good. Any console that isn't too powerful will run on this thing just fine. Overall, I'll give this phone a 7 out of 10 rating. This phone does pretty well with most of these departments like the performance, things like the build quality, and the screen, and sometimes the camera. They need to work on that. The build quality is uninspiring because the camera layout looks a lot like something like the Galaxy A71 and some Oppo phones. Because of its plastic build, you are most likely to buy a case. The only thing I like about the back is its reflective effect it gives. The screen is an IPS, which for this price point, it's about eh. Sure, it may be an improvement from what I got from the A10e, but when you compare it to other phones, you realize it isn't impressive. For about $50 more, you can get something like a Pixel 4a, which has an HDR OLED display. The camera does great in some areas, but it can improve on some tiny little things to make it great. It's good, but not great. Do I recommend it? From my personal experience, I would say if you can't really afford anything above $300, I think this is a good phone for you. But for some or most people, this may not be astonishing to you. It really depends on your use case, whether this is a go for you or not. Thank you guys for watching my review video. If you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe to show your support. Follow me on Twitter, support me on Patreon, and good night.